Good evening. The Met Office has issued its most serious red weather warning, meaning a risk to life when Storm Eunice reaches the UK tomorrow morning. Alerts are in place across the country, with wind speeds of between 70 and 90 miles an hour predicted. The government held an emergency Cobra meeting to discuss its response to the impending storm, and Boris Johnson said the army was on standby. A red warning means possible danger to life from debris, damage to homes and power cuts, and significant travel disruption. In Cornwall and Somerset, people are being urged only to travel if absolutely necessary, with many schools being told to close. It comes just a day after Storm Dudley caused some damage in parts of northern England and Scotland. Here's our science editor, Rebecca Morrell.
Taking the measure of Storm Dudley and its damaging winds. In the Yorkshire Dales, trees were ripped from the ground. Roads were blocked in Hertfordshire, and in South Wales, this wind turbine couldn't cope with the gusts. Thousands of homes have been left without power. An emergency Cobra meeting was called to discuss the situation.
Extend my sympathies to those who are still without power. We're working with the power companies, the local authorities to get their juice restored as fast as possible. But also, of course, the army is on standby.
But much worse is on the way. In St Ives, they're preparing for the arrival of Storm Eunice.
So we've got our flood defence boards that go on the front of the pub with sandbags behind them. Hopefully, stops the sea coming in.
The Met Office has issued a rare red weather warning for Friday morning for parts of southwest England and South Wales, meaning there's a danger to life.
It's going to be a bad one, yeah. As long as people take notice what the warnings are, don't go take any risks on quay, don't get washed away. Life is more precious than a photograph.
What's making Storm Eunice so potent is a combination of events. It's being driven by an extremely active jet stream blowing at more than 200 miles an hour high up in the atmosphere. This is creating very strong winds, forecast up to 90 miles an hour in exposed areas and 70 to 80 miles an hour inland, which is unusual for the south of the UK. The problem is this is coinciding with a spring tide on Friday morning, measuring up to 12.8 metres. That's more than 40 feet in some areas, which could bring storm surges at the coast and result in flooding inland. Meteorologists are concerned because the storm will hit in the morning when people are out and about.
The wind strengths are going to be stronger than we would normally see in these kind of storms, and it's going to hit highly populated areas. So it's going to have a really big impact. And the recommendation really, if you don't have to travel tomorrow, if you don't have to go out and about, is to stay indoors.
This was the damage caused by the Great Storm of 1987. Forecasters say Eunice shouldn't be as bad, but is climate change affecting storms? The Met Office says they haven't seen any compelling trends of increased storminess, but the impact of warming may become clearer over time. A storm like Eunice only comes along once a decade or more. Schools are closing and train services cancelled. The country is bracing itself for what lies ahead. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News.
Well, as we've been hearing, one of the areas issued with a red weather warning of danger to life is the coastal area of the southwest of England. The Environment Agency has issued 10 flood warnings for the Severn Estuary ahead of a potential surge in high tides. Our correspondent Andrew Plant has been to North Somerset to see how they're preparing for the expected arrival of Storm Eunice.
Locking down the shutters in Somerset and tying up the boats as the wind starts to get stronger here. Builders busy securing anything that could get blown away.
Dangerous, dangerous. I wouldn't come down and watch it, not this close.
Across Somerset, all schools are now closed tomorrow amid warnings about high winds and the potential for flooding too.
It's likely that we're going to see severe flooding tomorrow, only in the Severn Estuary, but that means there's danger to life with that, and that really is quite an exceptional event.
You can already see the effects of a normal night's weather here, the seaweed showing exactly how high the waters have been, but now this west coast here in Somerset is predicted to be in this storm's red zone, and that means very, very high winds predicted. In fact, some of the businesses on the seafront here say it's the worst forecast they've seen in more than 15 years.
Are you ready for the storm tonight?
In seafront cafes here, it is the weather on everyone's lips.
We have got the floodgates there, but like I said, we've been here 15 years and we've never actually had to use them. So we're probably going to prepare, maybe put sandbags like at the bottom of the door inside.
Others abandoning their caravans and finding the safety of a hotel instead.
So your caravan is all the way over there?
Yeah, across in South Wales, yeah.
Right.
Well, it is at the moment. Who knows, with this wind, it may be joining us fairly shortly.
Warning leaflets have been handed out door to door and flood defences put in place as the West prepares itself for Storm Eunice and winds that could reach up to 100 miles an hour. Andrew Plant, BBC News, Somerset.
So Storm Eunice will hit in the early hours of tomorrow morning. By 5 a.m, there's an amber warning for wind across much of England and Wales, with gusts of up to 70 miles per hour expected. There are also less severe yellow weather warnings for wind and snow covering much of Scotland, the north of England and Northern Ireland. By 7 a.m, a red warning comes into force around southwest England and southern Wales, and we could see gusts of up to 90 miles per hour in coastal areas. And that red warning stays in place until midday. Well, in a moment, we'll be live with our correspondent Jenny Kumar in St Ives. But first to Thomas Morgan, who's in Porthcawl in South Wales for us. Thomas.
Rita, you just mentioned there that red warning coming into force at 7 a.m. and at 8 a.m. here in Porthcawl, there is actually high tide here. So there's a real risk the tide could be pushed over onto the road and just onto the shops and seafront here in Porthcawl. Now, a number of precautions have been put in place across Wales in preparation for Storm Eunice. It's believed it's the first time tomorrow that all of the trains have been cancelled. The majority of schools will also be called off, some going to online learning. This health board, South Swansea Bay, has also cancelled all non-urgent care, and there's just shy of 100 flood warnings now in place across Wales. The First Minister has said to everyone here that they should avoid any travel unless absolutely necessary, and he was part of a COBRA meeting earlier today to make sure there were plans in place if there were serious issues across the country as the country prepares for Storm Eunice tomorrow morning.
Well, I'm here at St Ives on the North Cornwall coast. It's expected to be one of the hardest hit areas in the region. Today, though, it's been fairly calm, but the region is bracing itself for a battering. Today, businesses, fishermen have been making their preparations for what's expected to be one of the worst storms in the region since 2014. The council has been planning with emergency services and power companies. An emergency centre is due to start running from 5 a.m. The strongest of the winds expected between 7 and midday. Now, there are warnings of flying debris, of falling trees and power lines, so the advice is to avoid travel, avoid coastal areas and check for the flood risk in your area.
OK, Jenny, thank you. That's Jenny Kumar there and Thomas Morgan. Thank you both. And to get more on the situation where you live, do tune in to your BBC local radio station. And you can find details of your nearest station at bbc.co.uk/sounds. Or for the picture across the country, do head to bbc.co.uk/news. President Biden has said that the threat of a Russian invasion of Ukraine remains very high and could take place within days, despite Moscow's claim to be pulling troops from the border. His message was echoed at a NATO summit in Brussels, where Western leaders said that far from withdrawing, Russia had in fact added troops ahead of a possible invasion. There have been reports that pro-Russian forces have shelled a village in eastern Ukraine. From Kiev, Paul Adams said this report.
More ferocious displays of firepower as Russia's war games in Belarus reach their climax. Expected to last 3 more days, but then what? In Washington, President Biden, the latest to sound an urgent warning.
Every indication we have is they're prepared to go into Ukraine, attack Ukraine.
But war is already a reality for many in Ukraine. This morning, children rushed to safety after a rocket tore into their kindergarten. The village is close to areas controlled by Russian-backed separatists. Another shell hit a school. No one was killed, but violence in this area could easily escalate. In rebel areas loyal to Russia, they say they fear an attack by Ukraine. Western officials worried an incident could be manufactured by Russia as an excuse for an invasion. Here in Kiev, the Foreign Secretary arrived to express solidarity, still urging Russia not to escalate.
Russia can still take the path of diplomacy. They can de-escalate, they can move their troops away from the border. And I believe that's in the interests of European security, but it's also in Russia's interests.
Ukraine's president was at sea today, visiting the armed forces, telling the BBC again that no one has the right to determine his country's future.
We're just speaking about our independence. That's it. That we are deciding what we want. We are deciding what we'll do in our future.
At the UN Security Council, a battle of words and no sign yet of a way out of this perilous crisis.
We've been warning the Ukrainian government of all that is coming. And here today, we are laying it out in great detail with the hope that by sharing what we know with the world, we can influence Russia to abandon the path of war and choose a different path while there's still time.
Attempts to place the blame on Russia are futile and baseless, and this only hides the goal of shifting the blame away from Ukraine.
Fresh satellite images of Russian troops and equipment. Western officials say the numbers are still increasing and moving closer to Ukraine's border. Now, Joe Biden says he has no plans at the moment to call Vladimir Putin. It's not clear exactly where diplomacy goes from here. And the Russians have just expelled America's #2 diplomat in Moscow. Now, of course, the Russians continue to insist that they do not intend to invade this country. But today, Vladimir Putin's spokesman said that the situation around Russia's borders could ignite at any moment. Rita.
Paul, thank you. Paul Adams there. Well, as Paul said, Moscow maintains there are no plans to invade Ukraine, but as you've seen, large-scale military drills are still taking place. The US claims that at least 150,000 Russian troops are now positioned close to Ukraine's borders. And they say more have been arriving, even as Moscow claims it's completed military exercises and that units are returning to their permanent bases. In Belarus, 30,000 men equipped with tanks and artillery have been on manoeuvres. Our special correspondent Fergal Keane travelled from the nearby border town of Senkivka in Ukraine to the capital Kiev, meeting people who could be in the path of any Russian advance.
Nothing's changed. The same forest, and beyond it, the same enemy. The Ukrainian patrols that would be the first to see any advancing army.
Here on the border with the Russians just over there, there's no sense that things have been conclusively resolved. Not at all. It's just a pause in what remains a very tense situation.
Major Serhiy Khomenko grew up in a border town. His father served in Soviet times. Now his task is to help keep Moscow out of Ukraine.
The independence of Ukraine is enshrined in all our documents. It is in our constitution. As a military man, I need to protect this.
We drove south, along the road towards Kiev, to hear the voices of those who must live with the tension of these days. This is Slavotich, a Soviet model town built after the nuclear disaster at nearby Chernobyl in 1986. A place where evacuated workers and their families could start life again, and where they know the cost of dramatic upheaval.
What year did you move in here?
In 1989.
Just before the Berlin Wall fell.
like Valery and Gelena Sulimova, married 40 years. He's Ukrainian, she's Russian.
It's terrible because we lose a lot of friends. Some our connections broken completely. I think personally that our a kind of brotherhood never will get back.
It's a very big problem because my parents lived in Russia and our daughter lives in Russia now, but there are some tension between us, yes.
Even in the family?
Even in the family.
In Kiev, at the end of this journey, in a city that feels weary with the endless speculation about war, I met Vitaly Zelensky and his wife Olga with their 2-day-old baby Yaromir.
We can't be sure there won't be another Putin tomorrow who will want to create chaos. But I think peace will prevail, and we'll do everything we can to create peace.
We need to think about a better life, especially now, when we have such a miracle in our arms. We can't think about bad things anymore.
They've named him Yaromir. It means peace, a name given out of the hope that remains constant here and farther north, in the quiet towns and villages closer to the border, despite the nervousness about the days to come. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Senkivka, Ukraine.
The time is 18 minutes past 6, our top story this evening. The Met Office issues its strongest possible weather warning, a threat to life for tomorrow morning when Storm Eunice is set to hit. And coming up, Team GB's men's curling team are guaranteed to win Britain's first medal at the Winter Olympics after getting through to the final.
Coming up on Look East, the government has announced that 5 to 11-year-olds will now be eligible for the vaccine. For the last couple of weeks, it's only been available for those who are clinically vulnerable or have immunosuppressed family members. We're on that, alongside more of your sport and weather in 15 minutes.
It's 4 weeks since the government lifted its guidance on working from home, but some people say they're struggling to get to work because of fewer rail services and sudden cancellations. BBC research suggests that more than a fifth of train services haven't returned to pre-COVID levels. Train operating companies say they are beginning to bring back more services, but the government says there's no guarantee the system will return to how it was before the pandemic. Our transport correspondent Katie Austin reports.
After months of working from home, Lee wants to go into the office more.
Got your mask. The train actually is running today because mine was cancelled yesterday.
His partner Amy now has to, but the trains into London they rely on aren't as frequent as they used to be.
In my team, we've got people coming in from Kent, from Essex, and I'd say a good at least 25% of them are having problems every day. There's fewer trains an hour, the trains are very crowded, trains are randomly being cancelled.
Trains are one every half an hour at the moment, but I turned up to get the one that would have got me to work on time and it was just cancelled. So I was down to 1 hour. I had to change my plan, go home, work from home.
Going into his workplace will soon become compulsory, so that's a worry.
The pandemic and remote working have changed travel habits, and people's use of the railways hasn't recovered as much as cars or buses.
Rail timetables across the country were cut back again over the winter, with operators blaming high numbers of staff isolating due to Omicron. Overall, about 79% of pre-pandemic services are now running. Train companies insist they are starting to reinstate more, and 85% should be running by the end of the month. But they say there are enough trains for the amount of people using them. Passenger use is only at about 64% of pre-COVID. How timetables will look in future is still unclear. While leisure travel has fared better, fewer commuters means less fare revenue. The government says it's pumped in more than £14 billion to sustain rail services through the pandemic. That level of subsidy won't continue.
It's important that where we end up is having a railway service that is fair for those people who use it, fair for the passengers, but also fair to the taxpayer.
So can you guarantee that services will go back to what they used to be?
What I will guarantee you is that we will continue to keep things under review, which is what you would expect us to do.
Rail companies say the system must adapt.
We're certainly seeing changing travel patterns. We're seeing more working from home. That's why we've recently introduced flexible season tickets. And we need to continually look at how people are travelling, adjust the timetable to meet that demand, and also offer them fares that attract them to use the railway.
A major shake-up of how the railway is run is in its early stages. For now, commuters say they just want enough trains that turn up on time. Katie Austin, BBC News.
A convicted sex offender who absconded from an open prison in Lincolnshire on Sunday has been arrested. Paul Robson was serving a life sentence for attempted rape and indecent assault and was described as a particular danger to women and to young children. Lincolnshire police said he was found in the Skegness area this morning. Now, 2 serving police officers and a former officer have been charged with sending grossly offensive messages on WhatsApp. The police watchdog said the charges arose from an investigation into the phone records of Wayne Couzens, who murdered Sarah Everard. Well, we can speak now to our special correspondent, Lucy Manning. Lucy, what more do we know?
Well, this all stems from the investigation and conviction into Wayne Couzens. When police went to search his house, they found a mobile phone that had a WhatsApp chat with fellow officers from 2019. It contained racist and misogynistic messages. Off the back of that, 2 Met officers have been charged, 1 former Met officer as well, and they'll appear in court in London next month. Interestingly and unusually, they haven't been named. The prosecutors say that is for operational reasons. My understanding is that they will be named as soon as prosecutors can do so. It is another hammer blow for the Met. It just comes not long after racist and misogynistic messages were revealed from officers at Charing Cross Police Station some years ago. That precipitated the departure, the impending departure of Cressida Dick. And it is just one strand of the investigation that's come out from the conviction of Wayne Couzens. More than a dozen fellow officers investigated off the back of his conviction. We are still yet to hear the outcome of some of those most serious claims about what police knew about Couzens during his time at the Met.
Thank you, Lucy. Lucy Manning reporting. A swimmer who was killed by a shark near Sydney has been identified as a 35-year-old British man. Simon Nellist was a diving instructor and died in what's thought to be the first fatal shark attack in Sydney for almost 60 years. From Sydney, Shaima Khalil sent this report.
A diving instructor and an avid ocean lover, Simon Nellist was a regular swimmer who reportedly went to Little Bay Beach in Sydney's east almost every day. But Wednesday was his last. He's believed to have been swimming just offshore here in choppy waters before he was attacked by a white shark, reportedly between 4 to 5 meters. Rescuers found human remains and pieces of a wetsuit, and the search continues for what is left of his body and for the shark as well.
It is very tricky to identify the animal. So to give your viewers some idea, we do have sharks in Australian waters, but it's not every day that we do see a white shark over 3 meters long, and I'm talking a great white shark.
Most of Sydney's beaches have been closed, including here in Bondi. Many swimmers have said that while they want to go back into the water, they were quite shaken by what happened. This is the city's first fatal shark attack in nearly 6 decades, one that has devastated a community and shocked Sydney-siders. Shaima Khalil, BBC News, Sydney.